Hello everybody and welcome to another hobby cheating video, and today we're going to take another crack at highlighting gold in a non-metallic metal style. True metallic metal gold, making it really pop. So what I've got here is a little disc, and it's got lots of gold on it, and also I've got this sort of base with this chaos symbol. And we're going to focus in on really working something and making it pop. One of my problems with gold metallics is that they often look very flat. Like when I move this around, this is really good gold. Like this is Vallejo liquid gold, which is probably the best gold paint on the market outside of, I don't know, maybe an enamel based or something like that. It's alcohol based, which makes it pretty darn annoying to work with. But we're going to do our best. But the problem is it's still very flat. And one of the advantages to something like non-metallic metal is the way that it pops. So we want to try to reinforce that. So what I want to talk about today is the way we're going to utilize light and the reflection of this stuff to make it actually pop in the same way. And we're going to do it here on this blade and this thing here. So I'm going to start with some scale 75 intense chestnut ink, which is really one of the best inks for doing this sort of thing because it's glossy. And that's the first thing I want to talk about. One of the reasons I like gold as a metal is almost always shiny. Even in the shadows, it's still shiny because it itself is like polished gold especially. It's just so metallic that it's hard to ever lose its shine. And so I like a glossy ink. Now, Citadel obviously makes glossy washes. You can use those as well. I just happen to like the scale 75 because they're a little more intense, hence ink intensity. Okay, so the first thing I want to think about is how does the light hit our thing here? And you can see I've already done some of these other ones. And in this case, if I have this sitting straight up, see how this is in the most shadow and this is catching the light? It's because the angle of the reflection. Okay, we're going to reinforce that, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to just start pulling up some of the ink up into right here. And we want to work in a few thin layers. On the side here, I'm going to try to build it into the middle. So I'm going to go like that, where I have, and I'm pulling my brush away toward where I want to deposit the ink. Brush direction here is really important. Regardless of what you're using, whether you're using any other brand of ink or some kind of wash or something like that, you want to put your brush direction to be going where you want to deposit, especially when you're working with something like an ink. And you don't want to allow a lot of buildup. And finally, on this bottom ridge, this piece would catch the most light because it would be the reflected light. So I'm going to go ahead and push this down. I'm actually going to turn that like that, just to make sure I've got a nice, easy ability to get there. Okay? Now, the key with this is you want to water your ink some. Like, I'm not using this ink straight out of the pot. I'm making sure I've got a nice wet brush. And you want to build it up a couple times. But you can already see, like, look at that right there. Look at how much more that pops just with that one application. So just controlling your inks, your shades on the metal is a very good first start because it can make sure that you don't, like, the problem with just washing it as I did down here is it uniformly affected everything, right? So if I really wanted to get in there, obviously I would do the same thing here. I would need to control my directionality. Okay. The other key is multiple thin coats. Yes, I'm sure something we're all very familiar with. It's very true with these inks because they're powerful and they're going to really have an effect on the metal. So we want to do a couple thin coats once the one has dried. That way we make sure that we're really slowly building up our shadows and we have them under control. Now, again, you can already see how much more that's popping there. Okay. So next up, we're going to go to some ink intensity violet. Now, purple is a great shadow color for gold. It's something people don't often go to, when they think about shadowing gold, but it really is a fantastic shadow color. What I'm going to do here is water some of that purple and mix it with just a little bit of the chestnut. But I'm still primarily going purple. So what I end up with is something like that. Okay? You can see how that's got those deep brown tones in it. And then what I'm going to do is in my deepest areas that would be in shadow, we're just going to do a very light touch of it. Okay? Because we don't want to leave a lot behind. We just want to push and reinforce those shadows. Same here. Just a little light touch. Down here, I'll be a little more heavy-handed since part of this is actually cast directly in shadow underneath. And then same right here. Okay. So now you can see we're really building up that contrast. Okay. Down here, what I want to do is get a little more specific with it because I've got in this symbol, I've got these big cracks. So what I want to do here is take some of that color and force it into these cracks to make sure they're really nice and dark. And the nice part about working with these is if you get them a little bit over, that's no problem. We can just go like that, give it a quick wipe. Because I'm also going to build up toward this point. I want that to be the darkest. And then I'm going to highlight down to here. Okay. So, now we've got some good shadows cut out there. All right. Our next step is going to be to tint some of our shadow just a little bit because we want to warm this up. This is a model with fire on it. I want to keep it nice and warm. We don't ever want to like lose the gold. So I'm going to take some of that Inktense red, again, mix it with some of the Inktense chestnut. And now what I get is something like that. And what I'm going to do here is in the middle section, I'm just going to very lightly run some of that over. Okay. Now, this is more of a filter step. You're not looking to turn your gold red. I'm very lightly touching the brush. I am not having a big effect. I don't want to have a big effect. I want to just add this sort of filter, warm up the gold some, right? Hence why I'm cooling, or I'm desaturating that red some with that brown. But now what that gives us is more interesting tones happening. Okay? I'll do the same thing down here. Okay? And if it's too red, you can just back a little off. Smooth it out. Right? Just that easy. Okay. So now we've got a good sort of shadow pattern, but we've got to build up our highlights. For that, I'm going to go to Vallejo Metal Color Pale Burnt Metal. The reason I like that is it's a silver with just a hint of brown in it. But here, this is still a water-based paint, so I can just get a little bit of it in my brush. It's naturally also quite thin. So down here, what I want to do is control what's going to shine the brightest in the light. So I'm going to take some of that silver, and I want to work it down there. Again, being very careful and controlled with it. Here on the center section, again, same thing. I don't want to leave buildup, just light touch. I don't have a lot of paint on my brush. And then here at the tip, we want to really make sure that this pops, and I've got to undo some of my previous work where some of the ink ran down there. Right? And again, same thing. We just look at it. Is it bright enough yet? You can see how, look how white that looks on camera. That's because I added that silver. Okay? And that's what we want at this stage. Because we want to really, really make that pop. Okay? Okay. The other thing we're going to do when we've got our silver is you know, that's one of the things that you often see in non-metallic metals is the edge highlighting. Well, we can do that here too. So we can take the edge. We want to make sure we get almost all the paint off the brush because we want to be very light touch with it. We can take that silver and just very lightly trace it right up the side. And very lightly trace it right up the side. And it's going to give us a very natural look, especially if you don't have a lot of paint on the brush. And very lightly we trace it right up the bottom. And if you're feeling real saucy, you can cut this line too, but that's going to be a lot harder. You can't just side of the brush that one as easily. Okay? So now what I've got is something that looks like that, and you can see the outline, especially where it plays against the darks. And if you make a mistake, if you get a little on, as I'm using a not great brush right now to go through this quickly, you can always just get back in there and in a very careful way just reinforce that shadow a little, right? Just that easy. Okay. Final step is once we've built in all these highlights and shadows is, oh, I didn't talk about the lower piece. When we have these down here where we've got these cuts, we want to take our silver, and what we want to do is very carefully, with a pretty sharp point, I don't know if this brush is sharp enough or not, we want to trace the bottom edge. No. Make a mistake, you can just back it right out. I always keep an extra brush near me. We want to trace just the bottom edge of all these cuts. Right? Effectively, we're just edge highlighting all these cuts to make sure that they really stand out. Same thing with the actual edge of the piece itself, or of this piece of whatever this is, metal. Okay, and if I were doing the rest of it, obviously I would do this edge, also the screw, you know, all these kinds of things would be what you normally do. And then as well, since I want this to be the light catch, I'll get a little bit of it right there on that corner. Okay, now you can see some of this looks pretty extreme, right? Some of it we've got looking pretty, like it's a bit stark right now in its contrast. So I have a little of my original Vallejo gold, and I'm going to make sure that's nice and alcoholed down. So it's over here in my palette. And I add a heavy amount of alcohol to it, so what I get is something fairly thin. Okay? And you can test on the back of your thumb where your silver was. Run that over the top. How much does it affect it? Can you still see the silver underneath? Right? So you can play with your intensity by just doing some quick thumb tests. Okay. Then what we're going to do is, again, getting most of it off, we're now going to smooth out our middle. So we're going to take this and we're going to just run it right up very lightly over the silver. Maybe not all of it, but most of it, and over some of the shadow. And you can see, because it's so thin, we can still see those colors underneath. And that's what we want. We're using the gold here. That is one of the advantages of the alcohol-based gold, because you can really easily control the amount of alcohol in the suspension. You can effectively get a glaze with it. You have to be very careful, but you can do it. Okay? And what we're looking to do is cut out some of those extremes, right? We want to make sure that we have a nice controlled color. So it still looks gold, right? When I move that around, that still looks gold. And then same thing on the bottom, although we probably need to do less. And then finally down here, this is going to be the real key, because over here I really went crazy on the highlight, or on the shadows, because I washed the whole thing to make sure to get all those little cracks. So now I can just drag it back across, and look at that. Now we get that real nice contrast, right? You can see when I rotate it around how those light catches of the silver still show through, and now look like they're reflection points on the bottom of the cuts. And if you do lose your cuts or something like I did, where I got some silver paint in somewhere where it shouldn't be, it's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. You can always just grab another fine-tipped brush at the end. Just be very careful and go in and recut those lines. This is great for doing, like, if you've got gold and you want to keep, if you've got a big flat area of gold, you can forcibly put cuts like in here. In the same way, you could just take some very dark ink and a thin brush and just draw a line, and then take a silver and draw a line under it. Like, I don't need to have an actual cut here. So for example, I could take some of my purple, mix it with some of my brown up here on the blade itself, right? If we want to make them look somewhat thematically similar. And I could do a cut like that. Okay, if that shows up or not. There you go. Just a nice thin cut. Let that dry real quick. Okay. And then I can grab some of my silver. We're going to do that like this, just because it's an easier angle for me to work in. And so then we trace the silver right underneath it, and you can see it will catch that reflection point, and you can add those damages. Now, if you want to really make it matte, I would take some black, like some actual matte black, because that ink is still reflective and going to catch the light, and that's not necessarily what we want. You could always just take some flat black, trace it in there, make sure you get a nice, solid, deep line, especially right up here at the top. Okay? But that's it. That's all there is to it. And you can see how much more... So let's look at, you look at this right here, how flat that looks compared to this, or compared to this. In fact, we'll just rotate around. Before, after, right? You just get a much, much more interesting visually effect from that, from applying those inks. So, there you go. I hope that helps you think about how you can add some interesting tonal variation and pop to your true metallic metals and make them really show up and shine. Even in, and just they're just going to pop right off the table when you do stuff like this. And as you can see, it's a relatively quick process, especially once you get used to it. So I hope you enjoyed. Give it a like if you like it. And subscribe for more hobby cheating in the future. Share it with somebody else if you know that they're interested in doing some TMM in an NMM style. Sharing it's always the nicest thing you can do. Really appreciate you watching, and as always, we'll see you next time.